And we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, to use the usual hackneyed term since, I guess the beginning of COVID. It's become one of our new conference interpreting terms, I think, that we all have to learn in all of our languages. And hello and welcome to this LinkedIn Live. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Julia Poger. I'm an interpreter, a conference, business, and diplomatic interpreter. I work with English, Russian, and French. But you also probably know I run a business called Know Your Worth. And I help interpreters and really any service professional to understand how you work, what value you bring so that you can get your name out and sell your services and get work at your fees and your conditions. I'd love it if you wrote in the comments where you're listening in from today, and that way we'll know how far-flung our audience is. Before we move into today's topic, I'd just like to ask you to stick around until the end of the show to find out what we'll be talking about next month, since this is, after all, a monthly show. And now to today. So the interpreter's voice is a topic that more and more of us are focusing on. I'm seeing more and more classes on them popping up over the last few years, especially since COVID. Along with your hearing, your voice and your delivery are so important. After all, if you can't speak or no one wants to listen to you, what kind of a successful interpreter can you be? So my special guest today is, as you already know, Patricia Magno-Holt. As you know from last month's show on diplomatic interpreting, Patsy was the chief interpreter for the US Department of State, which means basically for us today that as a working interpreter, she has insights into how we use our voices that others probably won't have. Along with the voice class that she developed together with some actors while she was chief interpreter, Patsy has also been trained as an actor by the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, or RADA, in London. And she's performed in the DC Fringe, in Santa Fe, in New York, and in London, including off-Broadway in New York, I'm pretty sure. And I've seen her in a couple of those plays. She was magnificent. She's originated some roles, as well as having played Shakespeare many times, and she's also directed. So if anyone knows anything at all about interpreting and voice, it's definitely Patsy. So let's move right on into some of our topics and questions. And just to let you know, Patsy has been kind enough once again to say that if we run over the 30-minute mark, she's happy to stick around until all of your questions are answered. And since I had a lot of them, I thought maybe you guys might as well. So to our first topic, voice, the forgotten tool. Patsy, take it away.
Thank you, Julia. It's so good to see you again and so good to be talking to all of you wherever you are in the world. Voice, as Julia just described, voice is the forgotten tool. As an interpreter, you have many tools at your disposal, but the most important one that you have to use throughout your working life is your voice. And unfortunately, over the decades that I have worked as an interpreter, I found that voice training was absent. Yeah. It was absent from most of the schools, and it was absent from any practical training that interpreters were getting involved in. And so for a number of years, I set about studying the voice to see what could be done for the interpreters I worked with on staff and for the contractors, the many contractors that we had. And voice training was something that we actually worked on. And then with actor training, I developed that with a number of acting professionals. And here today, in 30 minutes or whatever amount of time we have together, I'm not going to be able to give you a lot of information on how to train your voice. I can tell you about the importance of it. It's one of the things that Julia and I really present in depth at the Cambridge Conference Interpreting course, which takes place in August of every year. So I can assure you that if you are really interested in that aspect of interpreting, it's something that we do go into at great length. So, importance of the voice. Simply put, if you were not an interpreter and simply the audience, who would you want to listen to? Somebody who sounds like this for a long time, or somebody who's using the nasal voice for a long, those are the people you hear on a daily basis around you. And you can probably count on the fingers of maybe less than 2 hands the amount of interpreting professionals that you would be willing to listen to for a 30-minute period. So the first big favor you can do yourself is record yourself, and record yourself over a longish period of time, 10, 15, 30 minutes, and see what your voice sounds like. See if your voice changes over that period of time that you're listening to yourself, and start thinking about what you would like to do to make your voice sound better to your audience. Because the fact of the matter is, unless we improve the entire product, shall we say, that we are providing our customers, our profession risks being taken over by machines. And I've said this a million times. It is only the quality of the product that we provide that will ensure the longevity of our profession. And for you personally, it is only the quality of the entire product you provide that will ensure, A, you're being hired on a regular basis, and B, excuse me, there I go, there goes my voice, and B, the useful and productive life you will have as an interpreter. It has been heartbreaking to me to listen to interpreters in their 40s and in their 50s who, after a lifetime of abusing their voice, lose it, or it's just not the instrument it used to be anymore.
Mm-hmm. Like singers who are getting older, and you can hear it in their voice. It's it is a bit sad because they're not able to use the entire package. I like that about recording yourself for a longish time. I would maybe add to that just a little bit and say, try listening to yourself afterwards without listening to the words, just listening to your voice and asking yourself, do I trust this interpreter? And is this a pleasant voice to listen to without bothering about what it is you're actually saying? That part goes for your interpreting practice.
That's a very good point, Julia, because interpreters who don't have a good voice or have a shaky voice are often not trusted, even though their output may be absolutely stellar. Mm-hmm. But if the voice doesn't go along with the content, it's very difficult for the audience to place their trust in you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So to our first actual question then, how is it that interpreters can take care of their voice?
If only we had a week, but we don't.
No, I'm not staying on for a week, but yes, I know what you mean.
So the first and most important thing is, as I said, self-awareness. Figure out what it is that your voice does well or does not do well. And then whenever you are interpreting, you are a communicator, you are a public speaker. So you will be using your voice for a pretty long time. And just like a runner who would not run a marathon without a warm-up, you need to warm up your voice. And warming up your voice work in general is about A, using your entire body, B, relaxing all the muscles of your body so that you are able to support your voice properly with your diaphragm. There are tons of really good warm-up exercises you can do that you can find online. There are things from the National Theatre in Great Britain. there are a number of schools, a number of professionals who have great warm-up exercises. We won't go into too much of it here, but whether you are sitting in a booth and doing simultaneous for 30-minute periods, or you are standing up and doing full-blown consecutive, you can do a couple of exercises before you even begin. So I'll go into a long list of do's and don'ts later, but before you begin your day, first of all, make sure that you are well hydrated. No dairy products before you begin to use your voice. And the first thing is to relax. So let's just do it sitting down. So sitting down, Julia's going to illustrate for us some little exercises that you can do. And the best thing to do is just take a moment of meditation in the booth, just like you prepare your notes and everything else. You prepare your body for interpreting. So close your eyes and start thinking about from the very top of your head, and we're going to go all the way down to your toes. So you're going to try to relax. You can start by massaging your head, and Julia will show you some of these exercises. And you go down your head, kind of rub your head, rub your ears, rub your forehead, just kind of find all those tension points you may have. One of the really important ones, believe it or not, is around your jawbone. The jaw is a place where we hold a lot of tension. So just massaging that gently and massaging here under the sinuses, that helps. And then keep on going down your neck, and then start rolling your shoulders a little bit. And do the same thing with the rest of your body. Let your arms droop by your sides and kind of wiggle your torso, move it around, wiggle your legs, shake out any tension you may have in your legs. Like I said before, your entire body supports your voice. Roll your knees, roll your ankles, do anything you can to just feel loose and comfortable. And then take a few minutes to breathe. You breathe in 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then take maybe 6 to 8 counts to breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breath out should be longer than your breath in. And do that several times with your eyes closed and just concentrate on the breath. Feel it going in and out gently. Don't force it. And once you've done that several times, you begin to warm up your voice with a gentle hum. Humming is one of the best exercises to warm up your voice. Julia. Find any note that works for you, and you just hum and over and over. And then you start speaking gently, and you can use a tongue twister, for example. Let's see, Julia, do you remember any?
Something about 1/4 to 2.
Ah, yes.
But I don't remember that.
Motto, what to do to die today at 1/4 to 2? A thing distinctly hard to say and harder still to do, etc., etc. So we go into tons of tongue twisters at the Cambridge course. So we have a lot of fun with them.
We do.
But we don't have time to go into all of that today. But those little tongue twisters are wonderful because they get you to work on all your sounds. You know, you can do your sounds and your various plosives. You know, you've got the P's and the B's and the k's and the g's and the t's and the does. And then, you know, just run the gamut of all the various sounds you make. It doesn't matter what language you're using. We're using kind of some of the same parts of our articulators, you know, the tongue, the teeth, the palate, etc., in order to produce those sounds. So that's what you're exercising when you're warming up. And that's basically what you're going to be doing. You're warming up your body first, then your voice, and then your articulators. You can look up more on the articulators in your own time, of course. But like I said, they're the jaw, the mouth, the lips, the teeth, etc. And that is one, yes, and simply saying om is a good thing too. It's the same as humming. That is exactly the same as humming, but always do it gently. Don't force your voice. Make sure that your voice is being supported not from your chest, but by your diaphragm. Look up the diaphragm. It's that muscle that we have under the lungs that supports the breath that is then going through our vocal cords or vocal folds and produces sound.
It sounds like we're doing, gosh, my voice already sounds lower. It sounds like we're doing a lot of the exercises that singers would do before they would go out to perform.
Absolutely. It's exactly the same thing. We're just producing sound in a different way, but the mechanics of what we're doing are exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, did you want to go through your do's and don'ts now?
Absolutely, we can do that. Let me pull up my list because I don't want to miss out on any of them.
No.
So here are I'll start with the don'ts that things that you should avoid as a speaker. It is not a good idea to smoke tobacco or marijuana, not a good idea to use drugs, and definitely not a good idea to drink alcohol. You know, a occasional drinking of alcohol, we all do it, of course, but try to avoid alcohol when you're going to be actively using your voice. Try to avoid caffeinated beverages when you're using your voice. They can dehydrate you, and hydration is extremely important for your voice. Like I said before, do not perform without warming up and then cooling down your voice afterwards. Do not try to be heard in noisy places. Don't push your voice beyond its limits. Unfortunately, bars, restaurants, and public places in general, I find, have become noisier over the years. And you have the noise of people speaking loudly, and you have the noise of music playing, or maybe even a band. And when you try to shout your way into a conversation in those places, that's very detrimental to your voice. Mm-hmm. Don't vocalize a sneeze. Do not, vocalize a sneeze. What am I saying? Don't stifle your sneezes. Yes, that's a cute name in German for the diaphragm thing.
Not that I could ever pronounce it, but yeah.
No. So go ahead and sneeze. Just don't phonate when you sneeze. Do not stay up late before you perform. And actually, any interpretation is going to be a performance. Look at it as such. It's going to help you a lot. Do not cough or clear your throat continually. Bad thing. The terrible. Mm-hmm. Don't try to clear your voice that way. Do not try to talk over a cold or laryngitis. If you feel that you're getting hoarse, do not overtalk. Do not speak on a daily basis in a lower pitch or a higher pitch than is comfortable for you. Find your voice. Find your pitch. Okay? Don't talk a lot on the day of a performance. When you are interpreting, try to save your voice. Do not speak if you have vocal fry. Look that up. Very important.
I wonder if I could try and do some. Let me see. When you're talking, it. No, I can't.
Don't force it. No. Not good. No. Do not yell or scream without an open throat and good breath support. In general, don't yell or scream, period. But if you have to, make sure that you learn how to do it with good vocal support if it's necessary. And if you're exercising or lifting weights, do not grunt. Those grunts from tennis players, very bad for your voice. Very, very bad. Now, here's what you should do. Make sure, especially when you're working as an interpreter, that you're getting plenty of rest. 7.5 hours, they say, is the golden amount. I don't know. It might be 8 or 9 for you. Whatever amount you need, get plenty of it. Avoid stress, or at least learn how to manage it properly. Eat well. Treat your body like the valuable instrument it is. Your voice, ergo your body, is your moneymaker. Take good care of it.
Can I just interrupt on that? So I just flashed on an image when you said that. So my vocal folds would be a bit like the strings on a violin, but my body would be the rest of the body of the violin. And if that's kind of skew-wise, then the sound won't come out as well as if it's like a Stradivarius kind of thing and it's been done beautifully. So now I'm thinking of the whole of my body as being the resonator for the strings of the violin or the vocal folds. Interesting image. Thank you.
It's a good analogy, Julia, but at the same time, it's even more than that because we have all these muscles in the body that we're using to work with the diaphragm, to work with our lungs, to work with, the sound that we produce. Drink plenty of water throughout the day. Really important. There are people who say you need to have 8 cups of water or 8 glasses of water a day. I don't know. That's up to you. And here's a very, very good sign of whether or not you're having enough hydration. Check your pee. If your pee is clear, it's good. They say, pee pale, talk clear. If your urine gets yellow or too yellow, that means there's some dehydration going on. Very important thing. Don't eat just before going to bed. Acid reflux can wreak havoc on your vocal folds. Like I said earlier, avoid dairy products before a performance. Avoid things like chocolate. That will only create mucus. Not a good thing. If the season is very dry, think about humidifying your bedroom when you sleep. That might help. Sometimes, steam from a hot shower can really help you. That's another trick you can try. Inhale at the ribs and inhale at the belly. Let your belly hang out when you're using your voice and you're using your diaphragm. Very important. Most of us are used to sucking in our belly, so we look better, but, let the belly do its job. If for any reason you're undergoing surgery and you're going to have anesthesia, make sure that you insist on an anesthesiologist who is really good and knows exactly what the risks might be to you during intubation.
Oh, God.
So that's a very important thing to take into account. And like I said before, just keep your voice in practice using your daily warm-ups, your daily exercises. Okay? I hope that helps.
It does. I have 3 questions for you from this list. Let's start with Wei. Thank you, Patsy, for the warming up. How about cooling down my voice?
Good question. Very good question. Thank you. The cooling down involves also hydration, continuing to speak less, but at a gentle level. And again, you're not increasing the volume of your voice. You start to slowly decrease the volume of your voice. You're still supporting your voice well, but you're just taking it easy and speaking less and speaking at a well-supported, gentle level.
Funnily enough, I noticed that when I've had a really active interpreting session, that when I come out, I'm still speaking a lot. Like I still speak as fast as I do or as animatedly as I do in the booth. So the cooling down is a really nice thing to kind of think about when you're doing that. Okay, somebody has asked, trying to understand vocal fry. This is why I tried to do it, but I couldn't.
Oh, okay.
Can you explain
Okay.
a little bit more about what that might be?
It's
Maybe give an
it's an
example.
important thing. Let's talk about vocal fry for a minute. Hang on, I'm pulling up some notes that I have here. You have, I'm sure, heard people whose voice you don't hear a pure and clear sound coming out of a person. It's like a deep, creaky, breathy sound of the voice, and
it's not quite you going hoarse, though. It's not quite the same.
No, it's not. It's not quite the same at all. And when you speak, vocal fry is something that you hear a lot in women for some reason, not as much in men, but you do hear it in men as well. So when you breathe, your vocal cords are relaxed and they open to let the air pass through them freely. When you use vocal fry, you relax your vocal cords, but you don't increase the amount of air that you're pushing past the vocal cords. And so you get slower vibrations and it results in this lower creaky sound. Your anatomy won't be damaged by vocal fry, but it can become a habit. It's kind of like, and you hear
that creak. It's that creak, definitely, yes.
You hear a lot of that, especially in young people. It almost becomes a fashion with a lot of, I talk like this and I do that. It's horrible. It's horrible. It won't damage your vocal cords, but it becomes a really bad habit. And it's not good for you. Not only that, but it's just not good to listen to. It's unpleasant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I hope that helped.
I hope so.
If you think about it when you're watching a film, and if you hear somebody with a very kind of a hoarse, not the smoker's hoarse kind of thing, but as Patsy was showing, something that was more, a little bit of a vibration to it, you'll probably recognize it. I'm hearing a few voices in my head, but I'm not matching them to people at the moment. So it's really difficult to think of. And our last question here is from Adrienne. Greetings. Does working solo on lengthy assignments instead of with a booth mate have particular consequences or impacts on one's voice, even if you're warmed up and trained?
Adrienne, the simple answer is no. I can give you the parallel in the world of acting. You've seen how many actors who are doing solo shows or singers who are alone on stage for an entire performance. No, if you are well warmed up and you're well trained, you can use your voice all day. Within reason, of course. But if you're using your voice properly, your voice will hold up.
This is not an endorsement for working solo, just saying that.
Not an endorsement for that, but there are situations, and Julia, you and I have both been in those situations where you're accompanying someone as a diplomatic interpreter, and you're the only interpreter with that person on a trip, and day after day after day after day after day, you're it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you're going to speak for 8 hours in a row. But if you're properly trained and your voice is well supported, it can be done. what I would highly recommend, if you have any doubts whatsoever, and I recommend this for everybody anyway, take voice lessons. Find a good professional who can give you training one-on-one if you like. Find a class. There are theaters all over the world in the large cities that most of you as interpreters live in anyway, because that's where we earn our living. You will find all kinds of classes. For example, the Shakespeare Theater Company in Washington, D.C. has wonderful voice courses. You will find them in New York. You will find them in London. You will find them in Madrid. You will find them in Paris. I can think of lots of places where I know they are easy to find.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me just double check that this last question. Okay. I think that our next question actually goes with one of our later subjects. So I'll bring it up then. In fact, with our next question, which is, or our next section, which is, what can we do when we're losing our voice? And in fact, just so you have it, the question is, do you have recommendations for homemade remedies for a sore throat?
Good question, Ana Cecilia. I would, a lot of people swear by certain things. Be very careful as to what you take. There are very few things I would really recommend. The most important one is water. Drink clear water, hydrate. And the other thing you can do is rest your voice. If your voice is getting tired, if you feel you're losing your voice, you're coming down with a bout of laryngitis, just rest your voice. And if you can't rest it, make sure that whenever you do speak, it is without forcing your voice, where you're doing your exercises properly, you're supporting your voice properly, and nothing is forced. Okay? Do not ever force your voice, even when your voice is fine. But a lot of those remedies, for example, mints or anything with menthol in it, not a good idea, because a lot of those things anesthetize your voice or your muscles, and that's really not a good idea. There are people who take all kinds of stuff. I will recommend having warm water on an empty stomach in the morning. I'm not sure about that, but water in general, with or without an empty stomach, is really important. Really important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One thing that I've noticed when I'm losing my voice and I'm actively interpreting, and this is not taking something, but it's a little thing that I've noticed, and maybe Patsy can tell me why it works, is I can keep going a little longer if I raise my register just a bit, so the tone of my voice just a bit, and not getting all screechy, but as I'm going along, this sound will come out much longer than this sound will. It feels very uncomfortable to me right now, but if this is no longer accessible to me for some reason, this seems to be a bit more accessible for a bit longer. Now, again, I don't recommend it, going into a day sounding like that. But if you're in the middle of your half hour and suddenly something has caught up to you and the water isn't helping or something, think about maybe at least till the end of your half hour doing, just raising that tone just a little. Though, again, I have no idea why that works.
I think that works for you personally, Julia, because that may be your voice. I talked earlier about finding your voice, and there are books by Cicely Berry. Maybe you can put that name up for us, Julia. Cicely Berry, who for many, many years was the voice coach at the Royal Shakespeare Company in Great Britain, and she was a phenomenal voice coach. She died not too long ago. And she had a book, in fact, called Finding Your Voice. And when you find the pitch that really works for you, you probably won't have to go up or down but that will be the comfortable pitch for your voice.
Okay. I will put that in the comments at the end because for some bizarre reason, I'm only able to write comments to YouTube and not to LinkedIn. So nobody will see the comments here unless I do it at the end. So that's fine. Let me just see who's commenting now. And somebody said, yes, Wei Yun Ye said, thank you. I'll definitely read it. Somebody's also put in a segment on vocal fry in the comments. So I'm sure that you can all find that and see it. And there's another person who said, Cicely Berry, Voice and the Actor, a fantastic book indeed.
Yeah. She has several books that she wrote, and they are wonderful. And she was a very, very interesting professional because she didn't just work with actors. She would even go to prisons and work on Shakespeare with inmates at a prison and help them find their voice. And, really, really interesting life.
Wow. Very cool. Okay. So our next segment is, what should we think about that we often ignore? And I think you might have touched on it earlier in the program, but still.
Yeah. So would we call this our top tip for the day?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
That's at the end of the time.
What should we think about? Okay. Well, the thing to think about is a greater awareness of where the voice is coming from. And as I said at the very beginning, one of the biggest things that we ignore is how important learning to use our voice is. That to me is probably the biggest takeaway I would ask you to draw from this conversation today, and find a way to use your voice more productively, and more than anything, learn to care for it, not just on a daily basis, but for the rest of your life.
Okay, so we have a couple of comments that have been made since we started. Let's do this. This one's a question for you. Do you think it's more recommendable to drink tea instead of coffee, since you said earlier that caffeine is not advised?
Not necessarily. I think you can have caffeine within reason. There's a certain amount of caffeine in certain teas anyway. But I think certain warm beverages, for example, certain teas with a little bit of honey in them, that's probably a good idea for your voice. The most important thing is whatever it is that you drink that's caffeinated, be it coffee or tea or whatever, drink it in moderation and make sure that you're drinking more water than any of these other beverages.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Eugene said that I went to a professional recording studio twice a month for a year to record podcasts. The engineer was my producer and director and gave helpful advice. It was a major investment, but it helped me immensely gain confidence in my voice.
Very good. Very good.
Which is great. That's like going for singing lessons too.
Yeah, it's kind of going along with what we've been talking about. Thank you so much for that. If you can find good professional voice training of any sort, it's going to help you enormously. It helps anybody who is involved in any profession that involves speaking to other people. And who speaks more to other people than an interpreter?
True. Here's another comment. If our voice is unpleasant, the audience ceases to listen to the content and focus on the sound. I've seen that a lot when you have an interpreter or a speaker who says a million times as well. So regardless of our performance, even though it's stellar, as Patsy said, focus a bit on your delivery as well. And the same person, Natalia, also recommends one visit a year to the ear, nose, and throat doctor.
Very, very important, Natalia. Absolutely. Find a good ear, nose, and throat doctor. Very, very important to have someone check on your vocal health regularly, just like you go to a dentist. Very important. Some people say it's more important to go to the dentist than the doctor. That's also part of the articulators that you're using. And let me give you a little quote that I have here from Cicely Berry, and why. And she basically summarizes everything we've talked about here, which is you have to feel comfortable in your voice.
Mm-hmm.
Use it to bring out the music. I'm sorry, use it to bring out the poetry and musicality of the language. It doesn't matter what language you speak. There is poetry and musicality in every language. And your voice is the one that makes the language fly.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that leads us into another topic. So I'm going to skip one, Patsy. We'll come back to it later and do this. Is the way we should use our voice different inside and outside the booth?
No. We should use our voice in the same way. We should take care of it the same way. You need to support your voice in the same way, whether you're inside or outside the booth, because whatever you do outside the booth is going to affect the way you work inside the booth. And if you get used to speaking properly, and by speaking properly, what I mean is, using your muscles, using your body, using your breath, using your diaphragm, using your vocal cords in the way that will make for a healthy voice, that's going to translate into the rest of your life, your professional life.
This one was actually my question, because it's something that I find I have to tell interpreters when I'm training them very often. And I would agree that you want to use your voice exactly, as naturally as you do outside the booth, inside the booth. But so many of us think that suddenly we have to start sounding like news anchors, and we start emphasizing little words instead of the words that have meaning in them. And when I'm talking to you as a friend, I tend to use more of my amplitude in the tones. So my voice will rise higher when I'm talking about something that's important and lower when I'm not. Or to divide subjects off, I'll use my voice much more than I'll use any kind of additional words, which I've been told outside the booth, like in a place like here, makes me a little more comprehensible than people who are just talking along like this and don't think about what their tone is. They don't think about the punctuation or where they want to stop, and it all becomes a monotone kind of like this. So I suggest that when you're in the booth, that you take your natural side, which you may not be aware of. And maybe there you should record yourself again, having a natural conversation with somebody. Ask permission, obviously, but you'll hear how you use your voice, and then take that and up it about 10% maybe in the booth. Because as Patsy has said many times, and I love this analogy, and so I'm going to say it myself instead of giving her the chance. We are working in a radio world while we are living in a television world. So all they get from you is your voice. They don't get how you look. They don't get how you use your hands, especially if you're Italian, and you punctuate with your hands. They don't see that. And so everything has to come out in your voice. So I personally recommend that people use the full range of their voice. And if you're lazy, it helps you not to have to use all the words out there too. So you can get rid of the word very if you say, this is important, right? Because you're using it in your register.
What Julia has said is a very, very important takeaway, which is basically a speaker's tone is as important as the speaker's content. And that is valid for your principal, whoever it is you're interpreting, as it is for you as the interpreter. And that's something we get into in our courses. We don't have time for that today, but for example, if you are a female and you're interpreting for a male voice, how do you use your voice in ways that are perhaps different to convey the same meaning, and vice versa?
And the second, just the addition to this question, but the answer will be obvious, I'm sure. Is the advice different for interpreters working into English and interpreters working into other languages?
No.
No.
The advice is simply within the cultural parameters of whatever language you're working into, you will decide what sounds appropriate for your language. But the basic mechanics are exactly the same, yes.
Yeah. I found that when I work into Russian, I have to keep my vocal amplitude like about here compared to my English, which is like here, because otherwise I sound like I'm completely nuts. You know? And you don't want, like, okay, you might want the speaker to sound completely nuts, but only if they sound completely nuts to their audience in English as well.
You know, that's an interesting exercise too. Just like I recommended taping yourself, or recording yourself, I should say, when you speak. Record yourself. If you work into different languages, record yourself in each of those languages and see if you sound different.
Mm-hmm.
My husband swears that when I speak certain other languages, my tone changes. And I think it's true. And I think it has to do with culture. So check that out for yourself.
It's fun. I've noticed that I'm much more playful and possibly even flirtatious in French than I am in Russian or in English, because I don't interpret into it. And so I still speak it the way I spoke it when I learned it and from the people I learned it from, basically. Yeah. Whereas with Russian, I've had to develop a personality in the booth. And so I sound more like me and more like my English personality as well. So you may have differences in the languages that you use for work versus the languages that you just happen to speak as well. So, and our last question from me, unless other people have questions, is, can an interpreter change their voice? So lower the tone or sound. I mean, so many of my students, I've had to say, well, you know, you don't sound believable because you're doing this. You know, you have one of those drawls that makes you sound like you're making fun of people, or your voice sounds really high and breathy and like you're giving, you know, telling a fairy tale all the time, instead of being something that you really want to listen to. So if your voice is less than what somebody would want to listen to for 30 minutes at a time, can you change it?
The answer is yes, of course you can. But more importantly, what I would say, I would modify that statement to, what you want to do is to find your voice. You want to find your authentic voice, the one that you're comfortable speaking in for a very long time. It's like determining what your A language is or your B language is, if you have a B language. Which one is authentic? Which of your voices is the authentic one? The one that you can support properly, the one that makes you sound like you and not an imitation of someone else, or not a character that you take on. No, this is you. And finding that can take a lifetime, but it's really worth it, especially if you want to avoid developing laryngitis, you know, losing your voice for any reason. Once you find your voice, it will stay with you.
Mm-hmm. And Patsy, just to give you your due, your line about living in a television world but working in an audio world or a radio world has gotten some feedback right
Good.
there. So
good. It's the reason why I have spent so much time studying Shakespeare, because if you think about it, that was theater in a radio world. It was not a visual world. What they did on stage visually was very, very limited. But we interpreters today live in a very visual world. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is explain to interpreters how important it is to create the AURAL, oral world, the world where all you do is hear.
Oral as opposed to oral. Yeah, I know. The good New York accent there.
There you go.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So before we get to today's top tip, I just wanted to let you know that the next LinkedIn Live show will be on February 11th at 4 p.m. It will be me on my own. I hope that doesn't disappoint anyone. I'll be traveling and I won't be able to get to a computer or to reliable internet during the first Saturday of the month. So it will be the second Saturday, February 11th at 4. And it'll be an AMA focusing on mindset. So if you have any questions on mindset, please send them in ahead of time. Otherwise, I will just talk for 30 minutes. And I realize that sometimes you like that, but I would prefer to have the conversation. Along with that, I'd just like to let you know about a couple of opportunities that are coming up. First of all, starting on Monday, TERP Summit will be taking place from January 9th to 11th. It's a free summit for 3 days, as you can see, put on by Sophie Llewellyn-Smith. I'm sure most of you have already heard about it. It's free for the 3 days. If you want to purchase the recordings for the rest of the year, then that won't be free. But for the 3 days, you can listen to anybody you like. I'll be participating. I'll be talking about showing up at your best on social media, and I'll also be a member of a panel on co-opetition. So I'll put a link into the comments on this particular show as well, just in case you haven't heard of it yet. Another opportunity is that I'll be holding another edition of my Smart Consecutive Interpreting course on February 25th and 26th. This is for anybody who would like to learn how to approach consecutive interpreting. You'll get some practice, you'll get a lot of new tips, and I have an approach to it that's a bit different than what I've seen in most of the other interpreting classes. So it's timed for both sides of the Atlantic. It will be on Saturday and Sunday, February 25th and 26th, either from 10 to 4 in the US on the East Coast, or from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. CET time. So you'll still have most of your Saturday and Sunday for yourself if you're doing it in Europe. If you're interested in receiving the flyer, please put a 5 in the comments and I'll send it along to you. And do keep in mind that if you put a 5 in and you don't see your actual name, if you see LinkedIn user, I won't know who you are. So I won't be able to send it to you, just so you know. And the last thing I wanted to bring up, and this is something Patsy has already mentioned at the beginning of today's show, is the Cambridge Conference Interpretation course is now open for enrollment. So our working languages this year so far are English, French, German, Italian, Russian, and Spanish. If you're interested, please get back to us as soon as you can, since demand will determine if we keep a language group or not. So for example, if you're a member of a certain language group that tends to do things later on and you don't get back to me until like May or June, your language will be axed. I'm telling you this right now. So I need to know in the next couple of months who is really interested in what kinds of language groups that we'll have. You can find more about this at cciconline.net, which I'll put into the comments below. So let's get ourselves back to the top tip from Patsy, which is
use your voice wisely 24/7. What does this mean? I actually asked my own ENT, who is actually an ENT to many, many, many actors and singers. I won't drop any names, but the list is endless. She's very, very, very good. And preparing for this session today, I asked her, well, what's the biggest problem that you see, even among voice professionals who should know better? And she said, probably the biggest problem I see with people is they shout during the day. When they're not working, they tend to use their voice too loudly, either screaming at the dog, screaming at their children, screaming at somebody. Remember what I said about even if you have to shout or yell for any reason, do it supporting your voice properly. Well, try to avoid the yelling or shouting altogether. Let's bring down the volume level in general. If you manage to keep your voice at a healthy level, you'll do yourself a great favor. And if you do need to speak louder, do it knowing how to support your voice properly.
Yeah, I still remember, and this is just a little war story to illustrate what you're talking about. Once at Cambridge, we had brought everybody to a dinner, and we had it in one of those super trendy restaurants where it's really tall ceilings and wide spaces and lots of hard surfaces, so voices bounce back and forth. So of course, as soon as you get two people in there, they start talking a little louder to be heard, and then you get 10 people and they talk even louder. And then here we were, we were 50 people approximately, and we had to keep talking louder and louder and louder over ourselves until we all were talking over ourselves, not just the people in the restaurant. And we all practically, lost our voices for the next day in class, which is not a good thing. Thank you, Patsy, for having come from table to table and said, remember, you're making much of the noise you're talking over. It was pretty funny. Here are just a few comments for the end of today's show. So I enjoyed it a lot, and it was an inspiring and instructive event. I really appreciate you, Julia and Patricia. So Valentin says, great talk, many insights. Thank you, Julia and Patsy. And Diana, who was with us in Cambridge at one point. Thank you very much, Julia and Patsy, for another extremely interesting session. In fact, Diana just got her Cambridge box 18 months late because it had been held up in Russian customs and I had to wait until I could deliver it to her, which is kind of funny. Many, many thanks, Patsy. So you have done your usual wonderful job, super insightful talk. One tends to perceive one's voice as their personality, which in itself goes through a journey towards maturity, and that's so true.
Well said, Ibrahim. Very good.
And Eugene, thank you. And one of these days, I'll have to get you to pronounce that word diaphragm for us at one point, because that was pretty difficult, I think, for those of us who don't have German. So thank you very much, and I think we will end it there and see you next month. Remember, on the 11th, for an Ask Me Anything on mindset, and please do remember to send in your questions ahead of time, or else I'm just going to tell you what I think, which, could also be interesting, but is a bit of an echo chamber for me. Anyway, thank you again. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy Christmas to those of you celebrating Orthodox Christmas today. Happy New Year to you in another week. And have a great rest of your month. Thank you again, Patsy, for coming on.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing some of you to have a lot of fun working on your voices, maybe in August.
Great. That would be fantastic.